So now I would like to introduce you to Hafizin Tajuddin from TikTok, who will be moderating the panel session today. Take it away, Hafizin.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you so much. Toph, Mediha, Ira, and Amir, thank you so much for joining the session. And Toph, very informative presentation. I think I have been receiving a number of questions from our media friends and also the media practitioners as to the timing of the GPPA. It looks as if that political parties and political accounts have been limited in terms of what they can do. I mean, they can do. Leading up to the election in Malaysia in terms of the campaigning, but you made it very clear that it is a global policy that has always been there, but just recently enhanced, just in time before the election, unfortunately, or fortunately for that matter. I would like to start today's discussion by sharing a research that I found. In September 2022, the Asia Center, with the support of Google, published a report on youth and disinformation in Malaysia, strengthening electoral integrity. And it's very timely because 2 months down the road from the report from where the report first published, that we are seeing that 15th general election is happening for real this time, and then the report identifies the potential risk from the disinformation that youth are likely to face in the upcoming election. And the report has tracked the past 5 elections, and they can see that there are a number of common themes related to disinformation or misinformation that have been affecting youth in the past and will affect youth again this time around. And interestingly, though, according to the report, which we will have a very interesting conversation, especially with Madiha on board since we just launched the content code, legal and non-legal measures, the report says, remain largely ineffective against political disinformation. And moving forward, the report suggests or recommends that the development of non-legal measures such as media and digital literacy and early education among youth would carry more weight and effectiveness. Which, on that note, brings me to my first question to Ira. As a political observer, as a researcher at Ideas, my first question, Ira, to you is, what is your view on the political and electoral literacy level among youth voters? Are they susceptible, or are they generally able to differentiate facts and misinformation? So what's your take, Ira?
Thanks Hafizin and Toph for the presentation. I learned a lot just from that. I'm not too familiar with the tech space, so thank you so much for that. This is an interesting question. I get this question quite often, which is how politically literate or how much do young people know about democracy, about our governance systems in Malaysia, and a lot of times the answer to that is no. Young people or youth in Malaysia are not very don't really understand how government works. For example, there are even university students don't know the difference between state assembly and the federal parliament. They don't know why they have to vote for not in this election in many states, but they don't know why you have to vote for 2 people during the election, right? In most states other than KL. So these are some of the common I would say things that about our political system that many people or many young people are not aware of. And more often than not, the solution to that is always, you need to introduce some sort of democracy 101 curriculum in schools, right? I hear this very often. I'm a bit skeptical with that suggestion, simply because I think in Malaysia, the minute you introduce anything in schools, it will turn into an exam, and then it will turn into another another exam that students have to pass, and it just becomes academic and on paper, which then people are not going to take seriously, right? So I'm not a big fan of introducing new things into the curriculum. I think someone in the chat box brought up the Fahmi Reza, right? And how he has actually been using TikTok very well lately, I think, in all his lectures, I would say, using graphics to teach about our democratic system, political parties, how parliament works. Yeah, I mean, I remember, maybe I'll just share a bit of a personal anecdote as well. I was in Muar during the Johor state election a few months ago, and we met with a couple of young people, first time voters, and this girl she's 26 or 25, so first time voter, but she didn't know that she could already vote. It's like she just had no idea when she was she was very active in her community. So she had a lot of concerns and problems that she was saying that she wants politicians to solve. But when we told her, like, have you checked where you were voting? She's like, oh, I can vote. She didn't even know that. So we had to sort of like go check as the SPR website for her and show her that, look, you are registered and you can vote in the next election, right? And something in her eyes just changed the minute we said that you can vote, and that she was like, wow, okay, I didn't know that I could do something about this, right? So that's quite powerful. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not answering your question, but I think my point is that yes, I think a lot of young people are not familiar with these kinds of issues, but I don't think it's because they're uninterested, but I think there are just not enough platforms or not enough interesting ways in which this kind of information is disseminated. I mean, I suppose you learn these kinds of things in school, right, through sejarah or other subjects, but again, it becomes academic and it becomes an exam. So, and I don't think our schools or our schools are going to introduce, say, like student council elections or anything like that anytime soon. So so I think that I think the young people are not disinterested. I think the efforts, the outreach efforts has been just really poor, firstly. And secondly, I think even though I think young people are interested in many of these issues, just young people might be disillusioned with partisan politics. I will not deny that, but that doesn't mean that they are disinterested in politics, right? So I mean, young people are at the forefront of so many of the causes that our society is embroiled in today. You see, young people were the one who led protests, the Lawan protest, the Hartal Doctor contract protest, all over the world, climate activists and all that are all young people, right? So and I think platforms like TikTok have helped in disseminating some of this information. So even though young people might be disinterested in partisan politics, I think young people are definitely interested in political causes. And I think but I think young people are sort of a bit I think long form content I think is quite challenging. I think for young people to sort of devote their time to reading, right? So that's why I mean that's a huge reason why I think platforms like TikTok has exploded, because it's short, it's snappy, it's interesting, and yeah, you just scroll and you don't need to read some I don't know 1,000 word piece on an op-ed on something, and you open an op-ed and it says like 5-minute read, and you're like, okay, I'm not reading that, it takes me 5 minutes, right? So yeah, so I think the challenge really is to sort of how do you channel the passion and the passion that young people have for so many causes that are so important, climate change, gender, high cost of living, jobs, the economy. How do you channel that into make sure they come out and vote? So I think that's the challenge, right? Because I think partisan politics all over the world, I think, is facing a huge challenge in getting young people to be interested, for good reason as well in many cases, right? Yeah, so I think I will stop there for now. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you so much, Ira. I think that's a refreshing take, because we are getting a mixed signal, I would say, from the various media or reports that we're covering. At one end, we know that there have been reports that youth will be decision makers, youth are ready. But then at the same time, the observation that you shared is very refreshing as well, that, confusion continues to persist, even on the basic areas between DON and Parliament, for example, and then which I think only validates the effort that we are doing
Hi bro, how you man?
at TikTok, especially the Manipur side for the general the election as talk presented. Building on what Ira said about youth care about political causes, maybe this I will arrow this to you, Amir Farid. What are the current priority topics among youth for the upcoming election? Are these topics prone or susceptible to misinformation? Knowing too well that this would be the go-to areas for them, especially for those who are targeting youth voters. Over to you.
All right, thank you, Hafizin, Tawf, Ira, Madiha, and our media friends. Yes, absolutely. It's ironic people say that youth voters are critical. Of course, it is in terms of absolute numbers. New voters, including youth voters, more than 5 million voters this time around. And I would like to touch on a bit what Ira said about political literacy first. It is not just among youth that they do not know the split between DON, State Assembly, and Parliament. I've interviewed in the past couple of weeks, especially this election, the confusion since the people have taken it for granted that Parliament and State Legislative Assembly elections are on the same day. But this time around, it isn't in most states, in most cases, right? So it's prevalent across across age groups, and this fact that people also have forgotten, and Ira said this as well, that some of the youth are not, because so much emphasis is given to the 18-year-olds we talk about, because of the branding is Undi 18, we talk about Undi 18. People forget there's another part of it, which is automatic voter registration. So this is something that I've discussed in many forums before, that there should be more campaign. And I've seen, actually, to be fair to the Election Commission, I've seen some videos. They've taken heed of some of the input that people like us have been discussing in forums previously. So back to youth votes and what are their concerns. Of course, with any voter age group, it's not homogeneous. There are many subsets of issues that youth look for. But in particular, of course, if you are 18 to 21 and 21 to 29, 18 to 21 in particular cares about education, cares about future, which includes side jobs. So it's economic issues. So wanting to be an influencer, earning some money of content, that's normal. That's 18 to 21. So much so that in some other forums, we've got to keep reminding our young people that higher education is still a ticket to a better future. So stay in school, stay in university, get your degrees, but at the same time, you can earn extra money on the side. But you already know that from a very young age, that they care about potential earnings, right? A future. So economic issues, again, is an economic future. The ones that focus on jobs with decent wages are always topmost concern when it comes to youth voters. Of course, other economic issues like bread and butter issues prop up. It's always number 2, number 3. But I am getting, from my feedback on the ground, that particular issue of bread and butter is more prevalent for those above 29. Because once you start having families, you start to have to pay for childcare, you start to have to pay for tuition, all these kind of things in your for your family, that you start caring about other things. Whereas if you're in your 20s, it's more like where you want to eat, where you want to go for holidays. Can I afford my Starbucks a day, or a fancy coffee a day? or can even pay for parking when I go to work or public transport that I take. These are real concerns. So economic concerns are topmost issue that youth voters are looking for, and therefore in this election cycle, I think they would look for candidates or parties that can provide solutions to some of the economic issues. But of course, apart from economic issues, youth know and realize the evils of corruption. So values do matter, integrity do matter, protection of the environment do matter. These are some of the values that we see more prominent among the youth than it is compared to the older age group. And just not. I wanted to say that I consume a lot of TikTok. I spend a lot of time actually researching because you got to understand that the youth generation, they're digital natives, right? The way that they use social media is different. I am already in my 30s, so the way I use social media is also different from the generation below me, right? So for instance, I just like surf whatever, watch whatever FYP algo that comes onto my feed. I don't actively look for things, but I know of some of the youth that I've spoken to, some, of course, interns and all that. They search, they educate themselves through TikTok, through the social media accounts. So they search on how to learn how to do something. So yeah, so it's a different way of even using social media. Are these all these issues are prone to misinformation? To answer your second part of the question, Hafizin, in an election cycle, in the narrative pushed by politicians, there's bound to be political spin. They need to win the votes, right? So there needs to be a certain political narrative. But of course, therefore, there are safeguards that websites like, social media sites like TikTok have provided, which I think is very commendable. I'm getting from my friends across political campaigns complaining actually that they can't use it as widely as before, which is good, because you want to make sure that that the discussion is moderated. But of course, knowing political campaigns, they will try to find their ways to kind of like leverage or use these platforms. But of course, you have digital solutions, AI, to uncover them. One trend that I find interesting is because I go to the ground and come back to KL very late at night, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. This is when TikTok live a lot happens, and when it live, first it talks about entertainment, it talks about lifestyle, this current hype swipe song that's going on and challenge that is going on TikTok. But in the middle of the conversation, it talks about political issues. So these are the things that it's expected, but on TikTok side, the safeguards are there. But again, you have to give credit to the youth as well. They're not stupid. Yeah. Youth voters, this is again digital native. They know the game very well. And if you can't produce good content, if you have to produce a video that is so long to explain yourself, and it's just not entertaining, then what is the point? There is kind of like self-regulating criteria among the voters that they will not watch these videos. So content needs to be snappy, it needs to be creative, it needs to jump on trend bandwagons to make it an effective tool for information to reach to the voters. Why we talk about youth again and social media, the connection is because a majority of these youth are still fence sitters. Yeah. And as we know, at the start of any election, there'll be a huge chunk of sensitives. Currently, we are at this point, just before the start of the official campaign season, my calculations are about 30%. But of course, as it progresses and you reach D-Day, that will reduce. And therefore, all the political campaigns will want to engage these youth, and these youth spend most of their time on screen, on the social media apps, and therefore it's a very important platform to consume information. So sorry, it took a long time to answer your question, Hafizin.
No worries. Thank you so much, Amir. I think you covered a couple of salient points. I think the linkage between the number one, what I learned so far is the linkages between the priority issues and how they are susceptible to misinformation. And number two, while we share the same views here, I mean, complaints that we receive from our friends and colleagues who have not been able to utilize the platform, which is great, but also the risk in them finding ways to navigate the policies, which you correctly mentioned, Amir, about self-regulation and also ecosystem. There's only so much that TikTok can be doing. As Toph mentioned, we have put in place so many policies and procedures and everything. But Medha, I think you sort of know the question that I'll be asking. In terms of the revised content code, because I know that content code 2022 is meant to reflect the flavor and the reality and the challenges of the day. The code from the people, by the people and to the people, if I got it right. Hence, my question is, how exactly, or which part of the content code 2022 and how they could strengthen our efforts in combating misinformation online specifically? So over to you, Medha. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hafizin, and thank you again for joining us yesterday for the content code launch. I'd just like to say how much I appreciate Toph's presentation earlier. I think those are really excellent initiatives that TikTok is doing, and it's something that really needs to be shouted about. Because I think everybody on this panel agrees that youth now compared to the youth before, like when we were younger, are a lot more politically aware, a lot more politically savvy. And it's also due to the fact that there's a penetration of the internet, social media, of course. And what this leads to is a youth with lower attention span. And things like TikTok, which produces bite-sized content, and the scrolling method of consuming content may not be the best way to learn things. And so I really think it's a good step for TikTok to be not allowing political advertisements as well. I think that's excellent. What I can say is that in this situation right now, the youth, they're not just political observers, right? They're also now politicians. And in order for them to be effective lawmakers in parliament, we need to make sure that they are also not lawbreakers. And what the content code does is it provides a standard or best practices, global best practices and content standards for them to adhere to or to check on. Because a lot of times, people tend to think that the internet is this wild, wild west, that no law applies, which is not true. Because anything that's illegal offline is illegal online. And social media platforms all have, as we all know, community guidelines. And that's what we always like to create some awareness about as well. Now, going back to the content code, it is a good reference point for everyone, not just industry players, not just our members, but everyone who is right now, this minute, a content creator and content consumer can use it as a tool for self-regulation. And to answer your question directly, Hafizin, with regards to what's new in the Content Code 2022 that helps to further our collective efforts to battle disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, and all this, number one, I have to point out that the main principle of not just the Content Code, but the Communications and Multimedia Act is to avoid content which is indecent, obscene, menacing, offensive, and false. So we've got an entire provision in the content code that talks about false content and how, things which are not just false, but incomplete information and is likely to mislead must also be avoided. The fact that there needs to be reasonable measures to verify the truth of the content before you share it. And content which is false is explicitly prohibited except in things like satire and parody. So that's in the content code. And what we also have in the content code is the fact that we say attention needs to be given to respect diversity. and expressions of differences, but including but not limited to political persuasion, because that's something that we see happening quite often when we have debates and dialogues online. Things get very heated. So the content code sort of guides you towards having such debates, such dialogues in a more civil and ethical manner. What's new in the content code? Number one is, I think what's relevant to this conversation is we've introduced a provision that prohibits content that incites online abuse and gender-based violence. And I think anyone who's been on the internet can attest to the fact that we have trolls, we have haters, we have people who are dedicated to creating, to being aggressive to people online. So that is being addressed. And gender-based violence is very important for us to look at also, because if you look at politicians or political candidates or anyone who's vocal about politics, just as it is with any other situation, women tend to get the brunt of it. When people attack politicians, it's not as often as horrible as it is when it's directed to a female candidate. So gender-based violence and targeted harassment is something that the new content code also addresses. And it's something that we also create a lot of awareness on as well. Now, secondly, this is also something that I would later on like to get maybe Tauf or Hafizin's point of view, is in our content code, we now have a requirement where you need to disclose third-party sponsoring your content, right? So it's not just influencers and content creators, it's also news programs where they insert a paid content without it being very clear that it's paid. So sometimes you're watching the news and suddenly it segues into a whole segment which you have no idea that it's actually been sponsored by, let's say, a political party. And this is similar for content creators and TikTokers. How do we determine? Right now we say, you're not allowed to have political advertisements, but very creative content creators can insert political campaigning, can insert political messages in their actual content. The content code actually requires them to disclose it. For example, if this segment is actually being paid for or scripted, you're supposed to disclose it so that your followers and your users and viewers will know exactly what kind of content they are consuming. It's not organic content. It's something that you've been paid or hired or engaged to do. So that's one thing that we've inserted in the content code, but it really takes a lot of effort, a collaborative effort between us and you guys as well. How do we implement it in the best way? Because there's bound to be loopholes where people can sort of insert it. How do we do this? And I think that's something that we can work on together. Now, the content code, I have to also make it very clear that we don't govern social media platforms, right? In fact, it's not within our jurisdiction, and we make it very clear. But when we go out and make awareness activities and campaigns, we often get people talking about content on social media. TikTok being huge right now, it's often raised, as you saw yesterday as well, Hafizin, TikTok content is often raised. And it's because it's huge, it's because it's compelling. You have a lot more fans than you have haters, but people do wonder, are there any guidelines? Is the content free for all? And what we do at the Content Forum is we have dialogues with them and make sure that users know, social media users know that they are empowered to do self-regulation. Each social media platform has an age limit, for example, and it has community guidelines. It has self-regulation tools, including, as what was mentioned, reporting avenues, right? So when we have these discussions with them, what we want to do is to create a culture of self-regulation, so that TikTok is already doing your part. You've got your community guidelines, you've got your policies in place, but your users as well need to know that they are empowered and they have the tools to conduct self-regulation on the kind of content they consume and the kind of content they share and share around. And also, this is also very important. We get parents telling us, TikTok content is not suitable for my child. There's too many dances that I don't want my child to follow, etc. And I'm asking, how old is your child? And they say, 5. I said, I'm pretty sure there is an age limit that's being imposed by a lot of social media content platforms. They are telling you that you need to be, parental guidance. It's just like content that you watch on TV or the movies, right? It's classified as you or preteen or 18. So use such information that's being offered to you and have some control over the kind of content that your child consumes or anyone under your care consumes. So in a nutshell, what we do as well, aside from having the content code as a reference point for everybody, we create awareness and we heighten people's understanding of the fact that you can't rely solely on other people to regulate your content. You need to actually be empowered and aware to regulate the content you consume and the content of people who are under your care. And I think that's something that we can all work with in the content ecosystem, not just referring to the content code, but every other law out there that applies to content. And it's something that I think Ira mentioned as well. We may not need to insert it into school syllabus, but children also need to know how to navigate social media and the internet. We can't just let them off free. So I think the best way to do it is via these dialogues, via content that, for example, TikTok content, and anything else that actually can capture their attention without it being exam-based. So I think it's something that, because, TikTok, you're an expert in entertaining people with fun content. The content forum may have the information and the tools to help you with it. So I think a collaborative effort with everyone is really the way to go.
Thank you so much, Media. I think the panel session today is definitely a mutual learning. As much as you are learning from us, we are also learning so much more on the content code and the entire ecosystem, which will now, I would like to invite Toph on two things. And one, of course, Toph, to respond to the discussion that we've heard from other panelists. And number two, to share your experience in Philippines, because Philippines just concluded their presidential campaign, if I'm not wrong. And Toph played a very critical role in leading the campaign against or promoting election integrity in Philippines. So over to you, Toph.
Thank you, Hafizin. I think just to respond quickly to Mediha's talk, I think number one, we're very, very pleased to see the development of the content code, and it seems like the direction is very much aligned to the community guidelines that we have. So I think in that sense, we are on the same boat. Also, we're fully cognizant of the fact, and thank you for pointing it out, that there might be people looking for loopholes in the rules. And we always describe it as this: it is a race with no finish line, right? Because as we put up barriers, people will find ways to try and get around it. So we're very happy to work with groups such as yours to look for ways by which we can keep these bad actors in check. Now, having said that, also, I like to take cognizance of a point that both, I think, Ira and Amir raised, that, in terms of this election, right? It's not just about youth voters. It's about everyone in general. Of course, we're placing a lot of emphasis on youth because of the particular circumstances of this election. But let's not lose sight of the fact that this is elections not just for youth, but for all qualified voters, right? And for that purpose, I think that is the reason why TikTok focuses on the broader idea of digital literacy. And elections are a subsumed with this concept of digital literacy, because ultimately, what is the problem that we are facing across industry as online platforms? Generally, it's the problem of misinformation, right? So while we can do our share, taking down content, bad content as a platform, while we can help promote credible sources of information, if we as individuals are not equipped with that digital literacy skill to sift what is truth from falsity, then all of that will not be as effective, right? So that is why we are focusing. As a matter of fact, early this year across Southeast Asia, TikTok launched what we call a digital literacy hub to help educate not just voters, but users across Southeast Asia on a wide range of topics around digital literacy. So we are continuing that advocacy here in Malaysia, and just so happens that right now, the big ticket item is the elections, right? But like I said, even after elections, we will continue these digital literacy efforts to help our users in Malaysia become more responsible digital natives. Now, to a point also that Fizin said on the Philippine elections, I think a lot of us here have read news reports about what happened, right? Let me give you a first-party account of how that went along. You might have seen the headlines about supposedly TikTok being one of the leading platforms being used to spread information on Philippine elections, particularly in misinformation. But I'd like to also share that while those headlines were kind of prominent prior to the elections, none of it took root post-elections. The reason being, it had no legs to stand on, right? We actively engaged with media pre and post-elections, and we told them, look, that is not the experience that we are observing. And truth be told, I actually talked to one of the academic institutions that was conducting actual research on the quantitative and qualitative amounts of material that were put out there. And when they came out with the results, TikTok was a far third in terms of content. When I say far, isn't really. If it were an election, we would have been losing by a landslide in terms of disinformation. It was not us that was the center focus of a lot of disinformation efforts. I think we became, as Media said, we're such a popular platform now. We became a victim of our own success. That people thought that we were the center of attention. And because we were the fun, engaging app, people also thought we were kind of fast and loose with the rules, not knowing that we were kind of strict in terms of enforcing our community guidelines. And to segue that into Malaysia, right? Very interesting. Just a few weeks ago, when the GE15 was announced, I think this was somewhere in October, right? You might be interested to know that while the perception is that TikTok would be, again, the center of political discussion, at that particular day when the GE15 date was announced, one researcher that I spoke to who was looking into the content in TikTok told me that actually the leading trending topic in TikTok was not even the elections. It was K-pop, right, on TikTok, which goes back to the heart of what we are. We are primarily an entertainment platform, and we always say this. Of course, all of us here are interested in the election, so I would suppose, based on our algorithm, when you look at your TikTok feed, it will feed you. It will feed you political content. But I'd like to invite you to step a bit back into the wider universe of TikTok, and I think that what the researchers shared with me is very true. That by and large, the greater universe of TikTok is still entertainment. Having said that, we are fully cognizant that there are people who put up election-related misinformation. That is why we are doing in proactively taking steps to combat that. But we want to make sure also it's a collaborative effort. TikTok will do its share, and we will empower users and we will empower our partners to help us in this fight to come up with a really holistic solution to the problems we face. So back to you, Hafizin.
Thank you so much, Toph. I had a discussion with Toph. Elections in Philippines was a lot more like a grueling. The process was a lot longer than us. Campaigning period is super long. So I think at least in that sense, we're quite lucky. Focus on 2 weeks, then we can move on with the rest, right? So thank you so much for the panelists. I will now invite our media partners for any questions that you may have. Quick, just identify yourself, your organization, and then if you can suggest, to whom the question will be directed, that will be great. Otherwise, I can help to arrow it as well. So anyone, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Thank you. Feel free to put into the chat as well. Any written questions. Or maybe Koki, do you have any follow-up questions, to ask regarding your comments when Ira was presenting? Okay, maybe I'll start because I think we still have 5 to 6 minutes. In terms of like a quick steps, maybe I'll start with Mediha. There's so much. I think you covered some of it most of it in your presentation. But in terms of guide for youth or even adults to identify misinformation, what would that usually be? Maybe Mediha, and then we will hear from Toph from platform perspective.
Okay, sorry, I was looking for the unmute button. Okay, I think the advice that we usually give, and it's not just to the youth, like Toph very, very much eloquently put it, it's to everyone, is that whenever you're in the content ecosystem, you need to be present, you need to be aware of where you are. For example, when it comes to politics, sometimes people consume content that's actually political satire without realizing it's satire, either on Twitter or on Facebook or anywhere. And then they get really riled up about the content they see and they start sharing it without realizing that it's not awani, it's awatni, for example. and these are the kind of things that we always try to make people understand. when you're in the content ecosystem, you are bombarded with content from so many angles and so many different ways. We need to always be present and not automatically react, because there are some clickbaits and hate baits and content that's just there to increase your anger or to trigger a reaction, an emotional reaction. And it's usually these content that eventually goes viral without anyone actually verifying it first. So we point that out. Things like, for example, the fact right now, putting aside deepfakes and AI, even something as simple as screenshots of social media posts. People start sharing without actually going to the account to check whether it actually came from that account. So they say, oh, the minister said this, look at this screenshot, it's absolutely horrible and racist or sexist or whatever it is. But it's actually something that people just conjured up with the many apps and many softwares or many things out there that can allow you to create fake tweets or fake posts. So we try to create this awareness to people to always be present and be aware. And secondly is, even if content that you see is correct, is true, is authentic, but if it's hateful, if it's offensive, if it's something that you feel that shouldn't have been posted, then you really shouldn't repost it. So we don't share, we don't engage with such content either, because that seems to be an issue now as well. Everybody's just really eager to show how much they hate this post by resharing it so that everybody else hates it. But that makes such content viral. And we want more credible, more authentic content to be out there instead of such content. The last thing I just want to give specifically for the youth is I would really, really appreciate and encourage them to play their role in the bigger picture. Take pride in your quick research skills, because I tell you, the younger generation is excellent in fact checking. They can very easily fact check for you. I mean, I fact check for my parents, but I'm not that young. I know people who can do it much better. I think they should take pride in that, and their great communication skills. So please help the boomers or the less digitally savvy community to spread truth and information. I think the youth can play a really big role in this, and I really appreciate to see those people who are doing it, and I would encourage everyone else to do the same.
Thank you, Medeha. When you mention boomers, you're not referring to the WhatsApp group Taman, WhatsApp group Surau, right? I'm just kidding.
Actually, I am, yes.
Yes. Oh, that's funny. All right, Top. I think I'll combine two questions that we received. Number one from Jivan, from Tech ENT, and maybe from Akmal as well. Question one, whether TikTok has any specific moderation team that focuses on election-related content. That's number one. And number two, from Akmal, we recently saw Fahmi Rezas. Fahmi Rezas is a TikToker, a content producer, live being flagged for supposed content violation. How is TikTok making sure that actual informative content isn't being taken down? So over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Abizin. I think that goes into the first pillar of our strategy, which is to properly enforce the community guidelines. As I shared earlier, we have a dedicated team, a trust and safety team that round the clock monitors all the content that you see. Millions and millions of videos that are being put on the TikTok platform every day. And like I said, there's a huge amount of action that happens on the back end that no one ever sees, right? But we would invite you to look at our transparency reports, and the data shows that 95% of these violations are actually taken down before they're even seen by anyone on the platform. So having said that, I think this trust and safety team really would also benefit from, like I said, it's not a perfect system. We'd also benefit from people who flag correctly violations of community guidelines, particularly content on misinformation, hate speech, and the like, right? And I think talking about creators like Fahmi Reza, I think it's a great example of how TikTok as a platform allows genuine expressions of political opinion, right? We are not, prohibiting people like that from putting up their expressions, what they feel is their political sentiment. However, when it does cross the line and tries to violate community guidelines, say around hate speech, harmful misinformation, then it does get moderated by a trust and safety team. So I would invite actually all our users to also read the community guidelines, because I think TikTok has gotten to a point where it's become so popular that people just on board on it sometimes without bothering to read through the code that we have, which is our community guidelines. So I would invite them to actually go there, and it's actually very clear on the types of content that is allowed and not allowed, for them also to be guided properly. So I think that is my quick answer, that we do, while TikTok is still primarily an entertainment platform, we do allow expressions of genuine political expression, subject to them meeting the criteria set in our community guidelines.
Yep, thank you so much, Tov. For next question from Hilal from Astro, I would direct this to Amir and maybe Ira, if you want to, if you have anything to add as well. How can media complement TikTok in combating misinformation, given your direct exposure with media? So over to you.
Sorry. No, that's a very good question from Hilal. I think media can do its part by, of course, media already themselves have their own standards and guidelines. Therefore, if when they are on TikTok, they are seen as the credible and trusted source. So for TikTok users, mainstream media's role in social media, whatever that they carry should be credible and trusted. But at the same time, media could also help with fact checking or busting a myth, and not report on. You see, probably like have some sort of guideline of not sharing things which are, for example, like an accident happens. There's a video uploaded on it. Hopefully, if it's on TikTok, probably TikTok can flag it. But when it is on the responsibility of responsible media, not to kind of like share that excerpt on their media. I'm sure there are guidelines to this, but that's just one example. I think collaborative effort between media and TikTok could bring so much good to all the digital natives and users of social media who are thirsty for good, credible, trusted information.
Thank you, Amir. Ira, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to just add the point that yeah, I mean the media, I mean, such as Astro Awani, all the other really good actually news platforms that we have in Malaysia, I think needs to hold the fort, right? The bastion of truth and facts that that we see in many instances can be compromised nowadays by various technological platforms. So so I think, but also of course media platforms all around the world are also pivoting to social media in many cases, right, to attract new readers, and that's good, that's really needed, I think. But I do think the media plays that very, very important role of holding the line and really sort of becoming the a really trusted source of news. And I do think the mainstream media holds this very big responsibility, I think. And I also just wanted to add a bit on Mediha's point as well, which I think is really important about the role of young people in also being that fact checker and kind of that verifying news, right? Because I mean, as much as we are concerned about how young people digest information and being susceptible to disinformation, misinformation, I mean, from my own experience, and maybe some of you can relate to this, it's actually the older generation that I see that's sharing unverified news, especially on WhatsApp, right? So the thing about TikTok videos is, I mean, even people who don't have the TikTok app, you can view the video on WhatsApp, right? So WhatsApp is just, I mean, we can have another whole different forum just talking about WhatsApp. But what I'm saying is that young people are, I think, pretty good at verifying content. And just to add a bit more as well on what are the immediate things that we can do. Some good practices, right? When you share things, just put the date of like what the news, like what's the date in which the news that you are sharing was published. Because sometimes people share things from like 2007 and with no context, and obviously no one bothers to click and check it. So just putting the date, for example, of when this was shared, put a bit of context, 1 or 2 sentences. Why am I sharing this, right? Instead of just sharing some link or just some news with no context, no date, and it can be misconstrued in different ways. So I think that's important as well. So those are just things that just basic kind of I guess etiquette that we can all just practice in our day-to-day interactions.
Yeah, Hafizin, rather quickly, right? I think very, very appropriate. The Digital Literacy Hub actually has a mindfulness exercise here, and we have a slide that basically encapsulates that. I think the team can share with all our media partners afterwards. It's a very simple 4-step guide. It's STDA: stop, think, decide, and act. And that mindfulness exercise, it's found in a visual slide that tells you as to the problem of sharing these type of content. We encourage them to first stop, and then think about what are the consequences of just wantonly sharing this type of content. And then based on that thinking process, you decide on whether it has value to anyone if you share unverified content. And that action may play a significant role in trying to curb the viral spread of misinformation and fake news. So I think that mindfulness exercise that we encourage through the Digital Literacy Hub would go a long way to try and, at least at the individual level, try to quickly stop the prevalence of a lot of the problems we see in the online space. So back to you.
Thank you, Toph. Before we continue, we are receiving influx of questions. We initially our cutoff time is 12:15. May I check with Mediha, Ira, and Amir, and of course Toph, if you can stay a bit longer, or if yes, then we'll take on the questions. Is that all right? Okay. Mediha, is that all right? Okay, sure. Then if that's the case, Toph, a question from Alina Nadia regarding the research that you mentioned. Alina said, Toph, you said TikTok was a 1/3 of the various social media platforms in spreading misinformation. Could you share who were leading the polls in this study?
Well, I think it's better. See, I'm friends also with my counterparts across the different platforms. But I think it'd be better if I'd share with you the site. It's named check.ph, tsek.ph, right? It's like the Filipino version of Check. And it is actually composed of a group of very respected academics from the University of the Philippines and some NGOs working in the civil society space. So actually, they're the only ones who I saw who came up with a quantitative study in terms of the amount of disinformation that was being spread leading to election day. And I just invite you to look at that site, check.ph, and then you will see in the study that I think it's called the fire hose of disinformation. It's an article that leads up to election day in the Philippines, and you'll see, right? So it's all factual, and I leave it up to you to interpret the data that you will see in that study.
Thank you, Toph. Which brings me to Mediha. A question from Jivan from Tech ENT. Where does the content code and TikTok stand on the content like this, for example, on content highlighting and debunking misinformation spouted from politicians?
From the content forum and the content codes perspective, we absolutely welcome such content. I think one of the ways to combat the flood of misinformation and disinformation is to flood back with actual information. And this is what we do when we talk to government bodies or agencies, actual credible sources. We say, if somebody comes up with something viral that is attributed to you, you need to be very quick to combat that and come up with the actual information. Because the longer you let this misinformation and disinformation to float without a response, the more credible it will seem. So as long as the content comes out and it's correct, it's credible, it's information, then we welcome it, no matter who it comes from. So yes, from the content code and content forum perspective, that's where we stand.
Thanks, Mediha. Toph, I'm sure you can add on to that question, but maybe we can combine with the next question as well from Ashraf from MStar. To what extent does TikTok will monitor the content that is posted, and will TikTok eventually provide a special segment or campaign throughout this GE15?
Well, I think we do have these campaigns specifically for elections. Every time there is election in the market we operate in, like I said, we provide sources of credible information for the benefit of the voters in that particular market. Having said that, though, we have to stress that that is not the particular focus of TikTok, right? We do it as a part of us building credible sources of information on the site. But like I shared earlier, by and large, the bigger universe of TikTok is still entertainment content. So I don't think that will be a particular focus for TikTok as a platform. But we are, of course, cognizant of the fact that to prevent the spread of harmful misinformation, we have to do our share. And that is part of our contribution to ensure the credible content is on platform for this election.
Sorry, thank you, Toph. Last question from T from Nanyang. I will arrow that to you, Toph, and also to Amir, because we touched on this topic. So Toph, T is asking that you mentioned political advertising are prohibited. Then what are the do and don'ts for the political parties that want to use TikTok to promote themselves? Yeah,
I think that's a very good point. While we do make it clear that political advertising is not allowed because we feel it is not consistent with the kind of community that we want to build on TikTok, we do say that politicians and political parties can create their accounts. However, we also stress to these parties that when they do come on board, they are treated no different from any other user in terms of implementation of community guidelines. Meaning, if they violate the rules of community guidelines, then they are subject to the same sanctions and penalties as any ordinary user. So I think that is the basic foundation that we have, that if they come on board, if they choose to come on board, despite the fact that they know we're primarily an entertainment platform, then they should bear in mind that the rules will be no different to them. There are no special exemptions that we will provide to them simply by virtue of being politicians and political actors, right? So in that sense, the rules that apply to an ordinary creator for application of community guidelines are similarly applied to politicians and political parties. And at the same time, we do not allow them to monetize because of this new policy on GPPAs, and we do not allow them to advertise consistent with the old rules that we have applied for the past couple of years.
Yep, Amir, if you have anything to add on that, based on your observations, interactions with politicians, political actors.
Yes, thanks, Vizin. And again, I've mentioned it earlier. They just have to make sure that their content is creative enough. But at the same time, politicians are judged on three things mostly when it comes to election: track record, their perception that they've built for themselves, as well as outlining the importance of outlining their vision. So I suppose in developing that perception, they can use social media platforms like TikTok to reach out to their voters. But of course, do's and don'ts, because it's so democratized, users of TikTok get to choose, right? So if a politician is spewing, spinning things around, or talking about policies which which you don't agree with, or that particular politician has values which are not aligned to you, then you just don't watch his content or follow the content. Because at the end of the day, for fence-sitter voters, three things from my ground research, apart from the political, from the issues that they're looking at candidates, right? These are personal, this is human. This is the beauty of TikTok, because you can't, it's not like Twitter, someone else can tweet it, or other platforms, someone else can write it. But TikTok, they have to see you. They have to see you engage, act, be that entertainer that you are. And politicians are, most of them, good actors. It's a given. But three things that fence-sitter voters who are already looking at candidates are looking at. Three things. One is integrity, ideas, and thirdly is following. Because if you have huge following, of course the reach is great, and that in itself creates the momentum for people to follow you, because people want to follow what is trending. So if your following is huge, and you have interesting content and all that, you will naturally, there will be a snowball effect to whatever you say. But use it carefully, because again, young voters are smart. Voters now generally much more informed and aware. So just be mindful of all that and campaign to the best of your ability.
Excellent. I mean, great point there, Amir. I mean, about the the difference or the need for users, or in this case politicians, to actually do it themselves. So that's a very interesting angle. All right, thank you so much to all the media partners for the questions. Very great questions, I would say. And of course, thank you so much again, Mediha, Tov, Ira, Amir. Great discussion overall. And to the media partners, if you have any follow-up questions, please direct those questions to us. We're more than happy to share. And I think comms. Let me check a message here. And also we will share the press release later, capturing the initiatives as well as some of the key salient points that we discussed on the panel. Again, thank you so much. I wish everyone a very good Thursday. Hope to get in touch soon. Bye-bye. Assalamualaikum.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.